people believe the Bible is true?
Has science proven the Bible wrong?
Is creation and evolution a side issue?
Our ancestors understood origins by extrapolating from their own experience. How else could they have done it? Then science came along and taught us that we are not the measure of all things.
The simplest explanation is, there is no God. No one created the universe, and no one directs our fate.
You and I are the product of billions
We share a common
years,
ancestor with chimpanzees.
This animal eventually became human.
I'm sorry, but if you don't understand that humans and monkeys came from a common ancestor...
single out evolution and act as if there's some kind of major scientific dispute, and in fact...
Evolution is a fact, not a theory.
Evolution is a fact. I mean, that's right. There's no question.
Evolution isn't an opinion, it's fact.
Evolution is a scientific fact.
I'm sorry, I believe in evolution.
Lived in the ocean 200 million years ago.
8 million years ago,
We emerged from microbes and muck.
Peter 3:15, always be ready to give a defense to everyone who asks you a reason for the hope that's in you. And as you saw that question mark, we covered about every possible question there. So hopefully you feel ready to defend your faith. So today's lesson on defending creation is Replacing Darwin, New Origin of Species, Part 2. Outline, I want to start with the impact on millennials, 2 surveys, and when they're bombarded with what you're seeing in that video, and they go to secular schools, there's no wonder that they're kind of doubting, especially creation. Then we'll dive into DNA mutations. We'll focus in on the mitochondrial DNA, and that's the female DNA. We'll talk about what that's all about. We'll examine both the evolution and the creation mitochondrial DNA models, and we'll show you how creation fits DNA, evolution is so far off. And then we'll show you linear patterns of speciation within families. You know, when the animals came off Noah's Ark, those were the kinds, the dog kind, the cat kind, the elephant kind. And then you had speciation, the different cats and the different dogs appear throughout the generations. And we can actually time that, and we'll talk about that. First, I want to review these surveys, the impact on millennials. And the first one is entitled Already Gone by Ken Ham, Britt Bremer with Todd Hillard. They surveyed 1,000 millennials, ages 20 to 29 in their 20s. They interviewed those who left the church. They used to go, but most of them no longer go. Conducted by America's Research Group. And of the 1,000 evangelicals who attended church regularly but no longer, 95% attended church during their elementary and middle school years. 55% attended church during their high school years, and 11% still go to church and still went to church in their early college years. So you can see the decline. And they were asked questions like this: do you believe in Noah's Ark and the global flood? And 70% said yes. I thought that was interesting. Only 15% said no. Do you believe in Adam in the Garden of Eden? 75% said yes. 19% said no. So no real problems yet. Do you believe there's a Tower of Babel recorded in Genesis? 63% said yes. 20% said no. And 17% didn't know. Then we start getting into the problem areas. Do you believe the earth is less than 10,000 years old? 57% said no. 20% said yes. So the age of the earth becomes a problem. Another question. Have instructors that taught that earth was millions of years old? So did they have instructors teaching evolution in old earth? Almost 80% said yes. And 19% said no. You'll find out that most Christians go to public school. Not many homeschool or go to private school. Has secular science dating the earth 6 billion years old caused you to doubt the Bible? 46% said yes. So a little bit of majority caused them to doubt the Bible because of the secular dating. And then we asked, what one idea that you question more than the rest? Well, number one answer was they had no questions. That's arrogance. But the second one is the earth is young, not old. The third is days of creation were 24 days. And then was Adam and Eve real? And was there a Noah's flood? So these age of the earth questions giving them a lot of doubts. If you don't believe, when did you first have doubts? When do you think children or young adults first have a doubt? College? High school? Middle school? Any guesses in the audience? Elementary? Okay. But it's a little bit later. In this survey, high school was the most, but middle school second. College is only 10%. Elementary's less than 5%, but maybe that's changed now because it's gotten even worse in school. But high school and then middle school. So they're getting those doubts, and Howland, you said it, younger age. And we start seeing them drop off attending church. So I guess the lesson out of the survey is you got to get to the kids at a younger age. Don't wait till high school. College is too late. And then another book called Ready to Return by Ken Ham, Jeff Kinlan, and research by Britt Bremer. They did a survey of statistically significant amount of millenniums, age 20 to 29, but these are still currently in the church. They haven't left yet, and conducted by America's Research Group. And they asked them questions like this. Which of these makes you question the Bible the most? Number one answer, earth can't be less than 10,000 years. And then there's too many rules, creation account, no sense of suffering and death, worldwide flood, and miracles not true. But the age of the earth makes them question the Bible the most. If someone has challenged you or your faith, recall which Christian principle you were challenged on. Number one question, age of the earth. When bad things happen, how can you believe the Bible? Only Christians go to heaven. Look at the last one, Christians can't be gay. But age of the earth was the number one that they were challenged on their faith. So these keep popping up. Last week I talked about Fallout Part 1, where they interviewed high school students who left the church. Now he's going to interview the few who are still in the church, and they provide some answers why.
Why does this matter? Should we take Genesis literally as real history? Well, if Genesis is not real literal history, ladies and gentlemen, with a literal very good creation, with a literal Adam and Eve, and if sin did not literally enter the world through their actions, then you and I don't literally need to be saved from anything.
I'm a Christian, and I believe that there's a God who created this universe.
Did your church leaders, student leaders, did they bring in any creation teaching that showed you there was scientific evidence to support the Bible's account of creation?
Yes.
Do you still go to church now?
Yes, sir.
When it comes to creation or evolution, which do you believe more?
Creation.
Okay, were you raised in a church background at all?
Yes.
Still attend church today?
Yes.
Okay. Were you exposed at church to any scientific evidence or teaching of creation that you feel strengthened your belief?
Occasionally, yes.
When you say creation, are you talking about, creation in 6 days like the Bible says, or do you believe that God used some evolutionary process?
I believe in the creation in 6 days.
So what are you studying now?
Biology.
Biology, right. Steeped in evolution. So, but you're not convinced by the evolutionary arguments in your biology classes?
No.
Would it be fair to say then that being able to discuss creation openly at church has helped strengthen you in that area, prepare you for what you've learned here at college about evolution?
Yes.
I believe in creationism. I grew up in the church and I grew up going to private schools.
Did your church leaders or youth pastors present to you scientific evidence for creation that helped strengthen your belief and help you understand that evolution is wrong?
Yeah, we learned a lot about different creationist scientists and the proof of young earth creationism.
And so do you still attend church today?
Yeah, every Sunday.
Pastors often tell us that it is sometimes a struggle to get folks engaged as much as they would like. That the desire by Christians to daily walk the walk is often waning. You see, secular culture is actually salting the way Christians think. It can create doubts about the authority of God's word and dilute people's confidence in it. Do you think that such a loss of confidence could have an impact on their behaviour, as well as be a major reason why it's difficult to retain our youth in the faith? You see, there's one worldview that every single person in this country has been exposed to. The idea that evolution is true and that the Bible's account of origins is nothing more than fairy stories. It has been demonstrably shown that this is the major issue that creates doubts for many Christians. After all, if the Bible's first book can't be trusted historically, then where does the truth actually begin in Scripture? Is it any wonder then that believers have questions like, did God use evolution? How do dinosaurs fit in the Bible? And why does a good God allow bad things to happen? Is the Bible really true cover to cover?
My church kind of confronted what I was being taught in public school. I definitely think that learning creation and learning about how God is involved in science helped with my faith in God and my values today. Definitely churches and youth groups should be confronting what is being taught in the public school system, as long as evolution is the primary paradigm that is taught today.
Okay. So let's get started with Replacing Darwin, The New Origin of Species, and I have the copy of the book up here by Nathaniel Jeanson, and there's a lot of science in this. And I mentioned earlier, he has another one, Replacing Darwin Made Simple, so it's dumbed down a little bit, not as much statistics and math. So last time we talked on part 1, Replacing Darwin, what would it take to replace Darwin's ideas? And at the end of that lesson, we developed 2 key reasons. One, Darwin knew less than 15% of all the species, so should we trust conclusions that were based on less than 15% of the total evidence? And then reason number 2, Darwin tried to answer a genetic question without even understanding DNA. And why try to answer a fundamentally genetic question without any genetic evidence? Now, remember we talked about the kinds after Noah and his family got off Noah's Ark, and then they spread across the land. But also we talked about in Genesis 1, the kinds. There's a total of 10 references in Genesis 1 about kinds. And I pulled one verse. Genesis 1:24 says, "Then God said, let the earth bring forth the living creature according to its kind, cattle and creeping thing and the beast of the earth, each according to its kind. And it was so." And then you've probably seen this graphic before. Evolution has a tree. So there's 2 basic viewpoints. Evolution, where they believe we evolved from primordial slime through all the different animals, the sea creatures, the creeping creatures, ape, and eventually to man. And the phrase was from goo to you by the way of the zoo. But the Bible teaches God created all the kinds, the cat kind, the dog kind, the monkey kind, the bird kind, the elephant kind, and all the species came from those creation orchard. We're not related to a banana, like evolutionists will say. But biological populations can be classified in this nested hierarchy. Remember we talked about Linnaeus last time? He developed this classification system. At the top is kingdom, phylum, then class, then order, and family. Family is where we think the Genesis chapter 1, where the kinds are. And then it goes to genus and then species. You know, Darwin's book's about species, but what God created were the kinds, a little bit above that. And then the cat kind is Felidae, and the dog kind is Canidae. So when God created the two original cats and the two original dogs, and those are what Noah brought onto the ark. Once they came off the ark, they had children, or they had kids, and their kids had kids, and so forth. Now let's get into what DNA is. It's a twisted ladder in language. Has anybody in the audience heard of DNA with the spiraling staircase? Okay. Now there's different letters for the rung of the ladder. DNA has a chemical alphabet, but there's only 4 letters, and they are A, G, T, and C. And the structure that gets passed on every generation with the sperm meeting the egg. Our genetic capability gets introduced with each child being born. And that gets copied. But the problem is, the copying process is not perfect, it's imperfect. And there are mutations. So DNA copying errors and mistakes happen, and it enables us to compare the DNA sequences next to each other. So we can see a DNA sequence of one person versus another, and we can compare and see where they differ. And the DNA does mutate, and the primary reason to scientists is unknown. I think it's due to the fall of man. And the protein machine that copies DNA occasionally makes mistakes. Cells have DNA repair machines that fix known errors and mutations, but mistakes still slip through. They do it at big levels and they do it at small levels. We'll talk about the mutant fruit fly, known by Genesis that for a century, long before DNA was established, as the physical basis for heredity. Heritable changes to the appearance of fruit flies was documented and studied, and the picture on the right over here is an example of a fruit fly with legs coming out where the antennas are supposed to be. So that's a mutated fly. And we have this Pierre-Paul Grasset, Evolution of Living Organism. He says, no matter how numerous they may be, mutations do not produce any kind of evolution. They're always damaging. They're not positive. And then we have Dr. Lee Spentner, who taught information theory for a decade at Johns Hopkins University and the Weizmann Institute. Spent years studying mutations. He wrote an important book on Not by Chance, Shattering the Modern Theory of Evolution. He said, in all the reading I've done in the life sciences literature, I've never found a mutation that added information. All point mutations that have been studied on the molecular level turn out to reduce the genetic information and not increase it. What's that? Yep. And I'm going to give examples of animals that are mutated. Here's a mutant 5-legged bull. And you can see his 5th leg is coming out of the top of his back. See that? There's no new information there. It's not a beneficial mutation. It's actually a hindrance, where he has the 5th leg mutating out of the back. What about mutant sheep? Here's a picture of a short-legged sheep. No new information added, only a loss of information. And who's going to be the first sheep captured if they had to run away from a wolf? Right? From a predator. They're not going to survive, are they? Here's a mutant two-headed lamb. No new information, and it's not beneficial. And the reading it said two-headed lamb was born in England in 1996. Each head has a normal trachea and esophagus, but each head led to only one lung, and I don't think it survived very long. This one is a mutant two-faced kitten, and that's not a beneficial mutation. This one is a little uglier. A mutant one-eyed kitten. Again, not a beneficial. And a two-headed turtle. It's mutant, but not ninja. So again, not a beneficial mutation. So when you get to the science of replacing Darwin, his book, he talks about 4 mutation types. There's a single nucleotide and polymorphism type, where the switch single base pair identity. So if you can see here, it's GC and then it goes to AT and then TA. So that's one mutation where a single pair are mutated a little bit. The second one is called insertion, where there's an addition of base pairs or whole chunks. So it goes from GC to GC, AT, GC. So there's inserted more type of mutated cells. And then the third type is deletion, where there's removal of all sections, and it's passed through. It could be passed through generation to generation. And then the fourth type is translocation, where DNA sequences switch locations in the genome. So mutation rate prediction. We can use this to our advantage. We can calculate the mutations per generation because the mutations increase each generation. Each generation is becoming more mutant, which is not good. So if we know the number of DNA differences and the mutation rate, then we can calculate when 2 species originated. Conversely, if we know the mutation rate and time when a population split into 2 species, then we can calculate the number of DNA differences between the 2 species. So this calculate represents a prediction, or even a retrodiction. So let's talk about mainly mitochondrial DNA, and I'll be using mtDNA. So mitochondrial DNA is a subset of DNA, and this is the energy factors inside our cells. Energy factories inside of our cells. Mitochondrial DNA encodes some of the most important basic information for our bodies to function. Without mitochondrial DNA, we would be unable to convert the food that we ate this afternoon and convert it to energy usable to our cells. In other words, without mitochondrial DNA, human and animal life largely stops. Now, there's less than 17,000 DNA letters that come from mom, and I'll say why. It's only mom. And there's the location in the cell. It's kind of a little bit outside the main center of the cell, but it's there. It's simpler than DNA, and it's only inherited through the mothers. Mitochondrial DNA is located in the cytoplasm of the cell, and versus DNA, in comparison, is in the nucleus, or the center of the cell. And in comparison, DNA has 6 billion letters in each cell. Mitochondrial DNA is smaller with only 17,000 DNA letters. So how do we get it? Well, it's only inherited through mothers. When the sperm meets the egg, billions of letters fuse with the egg. The mitochondrial DNA are close to the sperm tail. The tail doesn't enter in, so it never penetrates the egg. So on the male, the mitochondrial DNA never enters in to the fertilized egg. So this is why mitochondrial DNA comes only from mothers. Now, nuclear DNA comes from both parents, but mitochondrial DNA only from the maternal line. So let's look at biblical human history with mitochondrial DNA. So the Bible says it begins about 6,000 years ago with Eve, the first woman that God created, Genesis 1 and in 2. And then the population increases. You know, they lived long. They lived over 900 years, so they had many, many children, and the population probably grew fast before the flood. And there were probably 10 to 14 generations. And some people believe there was enough for over millions of people within that short time frame. And then the flood drops the population to only three reproductive females, and those are the three Noah's 3 sons and the 3 wives. So it goes back to the daughters-in-law. After that, the population increased for about 4 to 12 generations till we get to the Tower of Babel in Genesis 11. And then after that, when the languages came out and the people groups scattered, the population increased. So we've had about 134 to 156 generations since the Tower of Babel. And now the population's over 8 billion. So we can look at the mitochondrial DNA or mtDNA mutation rate clock. So we've looked at over 50,000 vertebrates, and mitochondrial DNA genomes exist. And over 34,000 of those 50,000 belong to Homo sapiens, or us people. One mitochondrial DNA base pair mutates about 5 to 8 generations. Therefore, DNA acts like a clock. A new mutation means one tick of the clock and marks the passage of time. So we can develop a mutation rate formula. So if there's one mutation every 5 to 8 generations, looking at the mitochondrial DNA that only the female provides, the equation is mitochondrial DNA mutation rate per year equals the mtDNA differences among species within a subgenus divided by time divided by 2. Now, when we look at these different rate formulas, some women give birth, believe it or not, in their teens, and I'll show you where that happens a lot. And some women wait until 50 years old. So we can have like our range. Women give birth as early as 15 and as late as 50, so that's our birth rate range. And to compensate for this range, we calculate, make predictions for the entire range, or 15 to 50 years old. Now, there's a percentage of married women by age and geography, and I did want to highlight that the percentage of African married women between 15 and 19 is 33% versus 11% non-African women. So that is almost a 3 times more African women get married younger, and they have children at a younger age. And you'll see how that shows up in the timeline that Dr. Jeanson put together. So almost 3 times African women are married, and they're married at a younger age. This is part of their culture. So let's look at human mitochondrial DNA mutations. Mutations predicted from empirical determined human mtDNA mutation rate. So all women age 50 at birth, we would see 480 mitochondrial DNA differences. Now this is using the evolutionary time scale. So that would be, say, 200,000 years. All women age 15 at birth, there would be much more differences over 200,000 years, and that would be 2,600. But when we see what actually occurs in the women, there's only 77 mitochondrial DNA differences in the African populations. Remember, because they're getting married younger, having more kids at a younger age. So they're going to have more mutants because they have more generations of children. For the non-African populations, it's 39 mitochondrial DNA differences. Okay, that does not match the evolutionary numbers of 480 and 2,600. So this graph on the left is what evolution predicted, and the middle and the far right is what actually is there. So evolution is grossly overestimating the mutation rate because they have false ages. Now let's look at the creation model. The creation model, all women age 50 at birth would only have 12 mitochondrial DNA differences over 6,000 years. The younger women, like in Africa, getting married earlier, having more children, there's 80 differences over 6,000 years. So how does that match the reality? There's the African age where it goes to the top end of our range, forecast through creation. And then the non-African age is almost identical to the medium range on the left. So today there's only 77 in African populations and 39 in non-African populations. So the recent time scale predicts the current number of differences. In other words, the creation model matches the operational science to a T. And you can't get any more accurate than using DNA and the differences. So that tells you that what the Bible teaches is true and what evolution teaches is wrong. Let's go one step further. Human MTA differences using graphical trees. mtDNA differences from hundreds of modern people. Long lines represent many DNA differences. And you can see here there's a long line, and that's from the African lineage because they tend to marry younger and have more children, and more children you have more DNA differences. The short lines represent fewer. So similar to the family tree, where the length of the branches represent a genealogical distance to how many generations separate two people. So there's three major groupings or nodes on this diagram that are visually identifiable. Note the two sub-Saharan African lineage are twice as long, and that's that long line it goes. Okay, that's one group of people. Node 1 and 3, node 1's on top, node 3 is on the bottom, node 2 goes out, are the rest of the world. So node 1, non-African lineages, you could think of those who migrated to Europe, and node 3 are other non-African lineages, maybe they went to Asia. Since mitochondrial DNA genomes are inherited through the maternal lineage, who are these three women in these nodes where they came from? Any guesses? Very good, exactly. It shows up in the DNA. It's amazing. And let's look at what the Bible teaches. Genesis 7, verse 13, on the very same day, Noah and Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and Noah's wife, and the three wives of his sons with them entered the ark. Then God spoke to Noah, saying, in Genesis 8, 15 through 18, "Go out of the ark, you and your wife, and your sons wives with you. Bring out with you every living thing of all flesh that is with you, birds and cattle, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, so that they may abound on the earth and be fruitful and multiply on the earth." So Noah went out, and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him. So the mitochondrial DNA nodes point to Noah's sons' wives. After the global flood, the three couples bore children, and their descendants repopulated the world. All the mitochondrial DNA lineages trace back to these three major nodes. And the three nodes are the mitochondrial DNA evidence of this event. And it appears to be a dispersal event on the three major nodes as well. So what caused the dispersal? What happened that caused this dispersal? Any guesses? What caused the people to disperse into different areas? Right, Tower of Babel. And we find this in Genesis 11, verse 1, and then we read 4 through 6. Now the whole earth had one language and one speech. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top is in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we will be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth." But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower that the sons of men had built. And the Lord said, "Indeed, the people are one, and they all have one language. And this is what they begin to do. Now nothing that they propose to do will be withheld from them." And then continuing 7 and verse 8 through 9. "Come, let us go down, and there confuse their language, that they may not understand one another's speech." So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of the earth, and they ceased building the city. Therefore the name of it was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth, and from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of all the earth. So the mitochondrial DNA nodes distinguish the start of the Tower of Babel dispersion. So the Tower of Babel dispersal is evident in these three major nodes as well. Consistent with the post-Babel dispersal, and many of the ethnic lineages diverge suddenly from one another. Rather than being related back to one another through a long series of mixing intermarriages and slow dispersal, the relative branch lengths among these nodes fits the biblical narrative. We can go one step further. We can drill in even closer, and we can find pre-flood mutation evidence. There's short two branches connected to three nodes, consistent with shorter pre-flood time scale. The mitochondrial DNA indicates fewer generations, less mutations, due to long lifespans of over 900 years during the pre-flood time frame. The two branches of the mitochondrial DNA are evidence of this event. And it's visually the pre-flood mutations are far fewer than the post-flood. And that makes sense, right? Adam and Eve were made perfect, and then they had generations, and they slowly mutated. So the mitochondrial DNA tree fits the young Earth creation model. It's an absolute mitochondrial DNA for 6,000-year time scale. And the existence of the three nodes fits the fact of three surviving maternal ancestors after the flood. And the relative lengths of the branches connecting from these, radiating from these nodes, match the temporal expectations in Genesis 1 through 11 and the genealogies of the Old Testament. It goes further, and that's what book number 2 will talk about. I'm not going to go over it, but subnodes. All modern human lineage trace their genetic differences to ancestors that lived a few thousand years ago. And that's the history of civilization, and it's recorded in the mitochondrial DNA. So we could look at Roman, Mongol empires, Greek conquest, Persian Empire, and many other events that have left their timestamp in the DNA subnodes. And this model can be tested in the subnodes. And then I brought this, he wrote the next book called Traced. So what happened to the ancient Egyptians, the Persians, the Romans, the Mayans? Are we their descendants? Today's Native Americans, I mentioned this earlier, descend from Central Asia, who arrived in the early AD era, not when Columbus discovered America. Every people group on Earth can genetically trace their origins to Noah and his 3 sons. Now I'm going to get into the mutations and how the animals, just not us, that match the creation model versus evolution. We can look at the animals too, because they did sequences of animals. First one is roundworm, and that's a picture of it. Mutations predicted from empirically determined roundworm mitochondrial DNA mutation rate. So if we do the upper bound and lower bound, if roundworms underwent 9 generations per year, that would give them 45,000 DNA differences over 18 million years, because evolution teaches that. And then for the upper range, if roundworms underwent 104 generational changes per year, that's 9 million mitochondrial DNA differences over 18 million years. So the graph in the center is the peak to the bottom. That's the range that evolution So what do we find out in the roundworms? There's actually less than 2,000 differences. It is so small you can't even see it next to this evolutionary inaccuracy. Creation, we use since we only go back 6,000 years, and the roundworms undergo 8 generational changes per year, that gives them 15 differences in 6,000 years, or as high as 3,000 differences over 6,000 years. And comparing that to reality, look how it nails it. The right is identical to the left. So using the creation model verifies the DNA mutation rate. So the recent timescale predicts the correct number of differences. We can look at water fleas. They did mutation rates ranging from 7.6 million differences. 22,203 differences to 6 million. But today's rate is only less than 5,000. So evolution predicted that. The reality is on the right where you can't even see it. Evolution overpredict the mutation rate. Creation, it ranges from 18 to 5,000, and the actual is pretty close. So again, the recent timescale predicts the correct number of differences. And I have one more example. Of all things, baker's yeast. They actually did DNA samples on that. And it ranges from 2 million differences to 200 million differences using the evolutionary timescale of 15 million years. And what's the reality? It's very small. It's less than 20,000. Evolution timescale predicts too many differences. The creation model is within the time range. And recent timescale predicts the accurate number of differences. So we were able to make predictions based on 6,000 years. The evolutionary model failed to make accurate retrodictions. The creation model made very accurate retrodictions. It still remains over 1 million invertebrate and fungal species where the mitochondrial DNA mutation rate has not yet been measured. So Dr. Jensen is confident in predicting the mutation rate for these existing 1 million invertebrate and fungal species. And the equation is here. The mutation rate per year equals the mitochondrial DNA differences among species within a subgenus divided by 6,000 divided by 2. So new species from arc kinds. So the flood occurred 4,373 years ago. Noah was commanded to take 2 of every kind of land-dependent, air-breathing animals on board the ark. This includes mammals, amphibians, reptiles, and birds. Out of the kinds, remember we said that's families, many new species have formed in the last 4,373 years. So today, the 4 families contain over 33,000 species. And we can look at speciation patterns after the flood. You know, you had the original kind, then you had all these different dogs, different species of dogs, different species of cats, different species of horses. And we can track the speciation rate. So species could have originated in a different variety of patterns. For example, if you look on this graph, it might be hard to see in the back, but there's a red line with dots. And that's this far left graph where it spikes up. One speciation pattern that could have occurred after the flood could have been explosive temporal burst of speciation that might suggest post-flood conditions as a catalyst of speciation. That's one way it could have happened, explosive burst, where we have the species just come out, fast and then level off. The next possible pattern would be an episodic pattern, where you have, that's that green line where it kind of goes steady, up, where speciation could have occurred in fits and spurts, perhaps in a manner correlated with human migration and conquest. If so, speciation might have a relationship to human activity. The actual pattern that we find is the blue pattern, where it just goes up it goes up in a steady state increase, linear, based on genetic comparisons. In other words, species have been forming in families at approximately a constant rate since the flood. They didn't spike up right after the flood. They didn't have up and down. It went at a constant rate, and I'll show you. It comes out in the patterns amazingly. So if we look at mammal species per family, most mammal families have few species. Few mammal families has many species. There's 10 of them that have over 100 species, and I think that's some of the mice and things that are scurrying on the ground that most people don't like. There's one family, the Bovidae, which is cattle, sheep, and antelopes, has a complete mitochondrial DNA genome sequence, and information has been published for over 75% of its species. Another family, monkeys, has a complete genome sequence, and it's published for 45% of its species. So we can look at the Bovidae, and those are the cattle, sheep, and antelope. And we can look at, remember, the differences, the mitochondrial DNA differences act like a clock. The branch points represent a speciation event. So we can look at this species and how it's split, and it's split. And we've been able to document all the different speciation with all the different cattle, sheep, and antelope, and put it in these trees. So using the branch lengths, or the mitochondrial DNA differences, as a surrogate for time, we can create a speciation timeline for the family Bovidae. So this is what they look like. Species timeline, cattle, sheep, and antelope family. I'll talk about this. Each circle on this graph represents one species being born, or a splitting event. 78% of the species have mitochondrial DNA genome sequences. It's a lot. The black dashed line represents what we call a linear regression function. The gray lines represent speciation timing uncertainty. So the uncertainty is pretty close to that line. R squared value. This is important. When you have a R squared near 1, this is 0.9965. You can't get much closer to 1 than that. That's a very strong match to a linear mathematical function. So the number of species increase with increasing time. Same way with the monkeys. We see the R squared value of 0.9525, almost 1. Those R squared values tell you that the speciation is happening at a constant rate through time. We see the deer, the same thing. The cat family, the same thing. The dog family, 0.9657, the same thing. The dolphin family, the same thing. So what does this pattern mean? Due to unpredictable nature of environments, we could easily have expected speciation timelines to jump all over the graph. We may have predicted a few species to have formed shortly after speciation started, then to have nothing for a long time, then suddenly produce several more species, where you had that jump. It could have been entirely unpredictable. Instead, every family, every animal, every species examined, the pattern was a straight line. And the Bovidae species, you had one new species every 10 mitochondrial DNA mutations. So the mutation rate provides evidence for a young Earth. We can go back in time, and we have those nodes where it points to Noah's daughter-in-laws. The history of civilization is recorded in the mitochondrial DNA. The linear speciation rate shows evidence of a young Earth being timed after the global flood, and it matches how many animals are here today. This allows creationists to make testable predictionary models. This exceeds the evolutionary model on most of the fundamental aspect of evolution, the mutation rate. So young Earth model is taking the lead in this field. What's a definition of a good theory? Hypothesis that is not rejected after many predictions and tests becomes a broad explanatory framework, makes accurate predictions about the real world. Creation science fits this theory now. Initially, we were on the defensive. The first Noah's flood book was in the 1960s. Now we're going on the offense. and it's a superior model, making predictions. Evolutionists are now playing defense. Instead of rebuting Darwin, we're ready to replace Darwin. I'm going to end with this one note that happened recently. Creation science is meeting and exceeding the gold standard of science. We covered several testable predictions on DNA mutation rates, and they can be applied to other animals. Birds. The bird's speciation rate, if we use a creation model, there's 11,000 species of birds. We divide it by, I rounded up to 4,400 years from the flood till today. That gives you about 2 to 3 new species of birds every year. Evolution says 11,000 species, but it took them 35 million years to occur, so that gives you 1 new bird species every 3,182 years. Let's go to Darwin's finches as an example. Peter and Rosemary Grant's team announced the discovery of a new species of Darwin's finches, and there's a picture of him. 1837, Darwin documented 18 finches, species of finches, on the Galapagos Island. So that means we found 1 new species. It took 181 years. So if we apply that to the global rate of bird speciation, that would give us 3.5 new species per year using the finch having a new species. So this prediction is in line with the creation expectations of 2 to 3 new species per year. And the evolution time frame is way off, 1 every 3,182 years. I'll end with 2 verses. Psalm 33:4, for the word of the Lord is right, and all his work is done in truth. Psalm 119:160, the entirety of your word is truth, and every one of your righteous judgments endures forever. So before I close, any comments or questions on that?
I guess what we understand then is if you have a family, husband and wife, and maybe one of them has some kind of maybe a defect, or there's some kind of a problem, and if they have a child that doesn't have it, it's not that the DNA has added something, it's just that that part was not transmitted to the child. It's not like it improved, but that part of the DNA didn't go through.
Yeah, that's a good way to explain that DNA mutation for that particular child. But it doesn't happen, subsequent childs won't necessarily have that. It's just a mutation defect that happened that we have no control over. But what you're going to find, though, in fact, there's another talk I could have given too, where each generation inherits the mutations from the previous. It's about 100. So each generation, we become more mutant every generation. There's actually a limit to how many years the human race has by the increasing mutation rate. We're going to be actually mutated out of existence in the next several thousand years, if we even last that long.
Mark,
yes?
one thing very interesting you said, because when we look to the movies and the cartoons, I make the joke on X-Men, right?
Yeah, X-Men.
People say, oh, they are mutants,
yeah.
But they gain a lot of information.
Right, good point.
When you talk about mutation, it's not gaining anything, but losing information. But one thing that catch my attention is when we look to those rates, and families are getting kids much older than they did before, right? Mainly on the, I would say, European and Western side. Families are getting kids much later now. And I have heard several doctors saying that, for example, when a woman has child later, like after 36, probably close to the 40s, the chance of mutations in kids are much higher. So we could expect an increase.
Good point.
Rate, even though, I mean, maybe flat, but we need to make a calculation, depending how much, if this mutation will happen every 5 times or now every 2 times, even though starting to get kids later on, but increasing the risk of mutation, so, or the chance of mutation.
Yeah, that sounds reasonable to me.
Part of the reason too is genetic death, which we go through lifelong elements and stuff.
Yeah.
But it just shows the the fall of sin, and we mentioned earlier that Adam and Eve were made perfect. We're becoming more mutant, and we're not as robust as our ancestors.
Yeah, and the Noah comment you made, even though probably some mutation happened between Adam's time and Noah's time with the animals, we need to remember that God selected the animals that went to the ark.
Yeah.
It was not Noah.
Right.
He picked them.
Yep.
So he probably picked the ones which has less mutations or less
Yep.
vaccine, let's say.
Probably the best. Yeah.
The best ones.
The best animals go in the ark. Yeah. Yep. Alien intrusion, unmasking the deception, and I pulled one of the clips out. Anybody hear of ufology? No. That's the belief in UFOs. Well, I'm going to play this short clip. Oh, go ahead. Huh? Men in Black.
The idea that UFOs are spacecraft piloted by older, more advanced aliens is known as the extraterrestrial hypothesis. These beliefs are no small thing. Ufology is becoming the most widely accepted scientific religion and has led to the proliferation of some major cults founded upon this belief, like Scientology. In 1997, a CNN Time magazine poll found, among other things, that 80% believe the government is hiding the existence of extraterrestrial life forms. 64% believe aliens have contacted humans. 50% believe that aliens have abducted humans. And 75% believe that a UFO crashed near Roswell, New Mexico. Beliefs in UFOs and ET life have become mainstream beliefs.
Now, these religious concepts have become the basis for most modern science fiction. Consider the Star Wars franchise with its good versus evil concepts, its messianic and redemptive themes. It inadvertently parallels the biblical narrative in many ways. Do you know, one of the early inspirational movies was the original 1951 classic, The Day the Earth Stood Still. Now, the main characters were actually a parody of biblical figures. The alien Klaatu went to live among humans to understand more about them, and he took the name Carpenter. Jesus was a carpenter, but he was killed by this aggressive and less evolved species who did not really understand his peaceful mission. And when Klaatu was returned to his spaceship, his lifeless body was resurrected by the robot Gord, harnessing the power of the Almighty Spirit.
Hello?
I thought you were.
I was.
He has the power of life and death?
No. That power is reserved to the Almighty Spirit.
The scriptwriter Edmund North actually commented on these similarities.
It was my private little joke. I never discussed this angle. I hoped the Christ comparison would be subliminal.
Okay, so that's just a little taste. There's a lot more.